On a winter night in Albuquerque, December 2, 1972, more than 12,000 fans filled Tingley Coliseum, waiting for Elvis to ignite the stage. But in the shadows of that roaring crowd, a young mother clutched her child and whispered a desperate plea. What happened next turned a routine concert into an unforgettable act of kindness. The night air over Albuquerque carried the sharp bite of winter, but inside Tingley Coliseum, the atmosphere was feverish. Nearly 12,000 people pressed shoulder to shoulder, each one buzzing with the expectation of seeing Elvis Presley. The building itself seemed to hum with the vibration of so many voices converging at once. Vendors hurried through aisles with sodas and popcorn, while ushers tried to funnel the endless stream of ticket holders into their seats. The stage glowed beneath soft blue lights. The orchestra tuned up, each brass note and guitar strum drawing a fresh wave of applause from the restless crowd. It wasn't just a concert. For many in New Mexico, this was a pilgrimage, a chance to be in the same room as the man who had defined an era. Cameras clicked. Young women in sequined tops clutched flowers and scarves, hoping for a brush with their idol. Middle-aged couples clasped hands, remembering dances of their youth. Teenagers shouted in disbelief at being so close to the legend himself. Backstage, Elvis was dressed in his iconic white jumpsuit with the gold belt that caught every reflection. He breathed deeply, rehearsing the set list in his head, though he'd performed it countless times. The King's entrances had become legendary, moments of theater as much as music. Colonel Tom Parker, always watchful, reminded the band of cues. Hit it hard, he urged. And yet, amid the storm of anticipation, another story brewed quietly in the dim rows near the back of the Coliseum. A young mother, scarcely older than 20, held her infant close. The baby's face was pale, wrapped in a faded blanket against the chill draft sneaking through the building. While others clapped, she kept her hands locked around the child, her lips moving in whispered prayer. Her ticket stub was crumpled in her coat pocket. She had not come here for music alone, she had come for help. The contrast was stark. 12,000 people pulsing with excitement, and one woman weighed down by silent desperation. Have you ever been surrounded by joy while holding on to a private ache no one else can see? That's what she felt in those moments. Every cheer around her pressing harder against her solitude. The lights dimmed further. A collective hush rippled through the arena. The conductor raised his baton, and the familiar opening to Also Sprach Zarathustra rumbled like distant thunder. The crowd erupted, some leaping to their feet. For most, this was the climax they had waited weeks to witness. For the young mother, it was her last chance. She adjusted the baby in her arms, pulling the blanket tighter. Every eye in the Coliseum pointed toward the stage, but hers stayed fixed on the shadows just beyond the curtain, where she knew Elvis would emerge. Her heart raced, not with anticipation, but with fear. Fear that she wouldn't be noticed. Fear that she wouldn't be heard in time. As the music swelled, as flashbulbs burst like fireworks, the young mother gathered her courage. In that moment, the Coliseum seemed to shrink. For her, there were no 12,000 people. There was only the baby in her arms, and the man she prayed might listen. The announcer's voice boomed. Ladies and gentlemen, Elvis Presley. The crowd's roar was deafening, but even as the king strode into the spotlight, something small stirred off stage, setting the course for a night that would change forever. The year was. America stood on the moon, but Elvis was back on Earth, fighting gravity of his own. After years lost to Hollywood scripts he didn't choose, He walked onto a stage in Las Vegas that August, and the world felt like it was holding its breath. The crown prince of rock, clad in black leather the year before for his 68 comeback special, was ready to reclaim what the movies had stolen from him. Music, sweat, and the shiver of a crowd's scream. The lights dimmed, the curtain trembled, and then there he was. The opening chords of blue suede shoes cut the room in half. Before Elvis, and after Elvis, his hips were sharper now, his voice heavier with years, but the raw electricity never left. Women clutched at each other. Men tapped their feet despite themselves. In that showroom, for 90 minutes, the myth was alive again. But beneath the applause, there was another rhythm beating faster, darker. Elvis was restless. The Vegas stage became his kingdom. Yet his prison too. He performed twice a night, 7 days a week, under blinding spotlights and the relentless eye of Colonel Tom Parker. The money flowed, but so did the pills, first for energy, then for sleep, then just to keep the machine moving. There were nights when he'd collapse backstage, drenched and gasping, only to rise again because the curtain demanded it. Vegas cheered for his sequined jumpsuits, his karate kicks, his sweat-soaked scarves thrown into eager hands, but few noticed the price. Each ovation drained him further. Each encore carved a little deeper into the man behind the myth. Still, Elvis gave himself completely. He sang ballads with a tenderness that silenced the clinking of glasses. He laughed with his band, creating moments so warm that fans swore they'd seen the real Elvis peek through the rhinestones, and for a while it worked. He was, once again, the most electrifying performer in the world. But here lies the paradox of legends. The higher they climb, the lonelier the air becomes. Elvis, surrounded by thousands, felt the weight of isolation. Friends came and went. The colonel counted the dollars, and inside the king's heart, the boy from Tupelo, who once strummed a cheap guitar on a porch, began to fade under layers of glitter and exhaustion. The chapter of Vegas was dazzling, but it was also dangerous. It gave Elvis a second life. Yes, but it also fastened the chains he could never break. Sometimes the stage that saves us is also the stage that consumes us. By 1973, Elvis Presley stood at the very top, and yet felt lower than ever. The Aloha from Hawaii broadcast had beamed his image to over 1 billion people worldwide. It was a triumph no other performer had ever reached. The jumpsuit glittered, the orchestra soared, and Elvis sang with all the force his heart could give. From Tokyo to London, the world believed the king had never been stronger. But when the curtain fell, the silence told another story. Back in his suite, high above the Vegas Strip, or secluded in Graceland, he faced a loneliness that fame could not touch. The cheering millions disappeared, leaving behind a man surrounded by empty plates, half-read books and pill bottles scattered like confetti. The road tours grew longer. Private jets carried him from city to city, each crowd demanding a piece of the legend. Fans didn't see the trembling hands, the swollen face, the desperate fatigue, hidden under scarves and sunglasses. They only saw the man who once shook the world with a curl of his lip. Elvis never wanted to disappoint them, so he kept going. Night after night, he gave what he could, sometimes brilliant, sometimes broken. Priscilla had left. The marriage, once a fairy tale, collapsed under the weight of infidelity, distance, and the endless machine of fate. Their daughter Lisa Marie became his anchor, a small hand holding back a tidal wave, but even she could not fill the growing emptiness. The king who had everything could not find peace in anything. On stage, Elvis tried to reclaim joy. He cracked jokes, handed out scarves, and sang gospel songs that lifted him. if only for a moment above the darkness. The audience believed the laughter, but behind closed doors, his world narrowed to a handful of loyal friends, endless touring schedules, and prescriptions written without questions. There were moments of brilliance that pierced the fog, a song sung with aching sincerity, a smile that reminded the world of the boy from Tupelo. But they were fleeting. The lonely highway stretched ahead, with fewer exits, fewer companions, and a weight pressing harder on his chest. The tragedy was not that Elvis stopped being loved. It was that he stopped being able to love himself. His gift to the world became a burden he carried alone. Greatness can fill stadiums, but it cannot fill the soul. It was August 16, 1977. The sun rose over Memphis, as it always did, but inside Graceland, the world's brightest star was flickering out. Elvis Presley, only 42, lay lifeless on the bathroom floor. The news spread faster than a heartbeat. First whispers, then headlines, then a tidal wave of grief that swept across the globe. Millions wept, as though they had lost a brother, a friend, a piece of themselves. The king was gone. Crowds gathered at Graceland's gates, pressing flowers and handwritten notes into the iron. Women sobbed openly. Men stood in stunned silence. Radio stations stopped their regular programs to play his songs on repeat, each lyric now heavy with finality. Across America, people pulled their cars over, unable to drive through the tears. But Elvis's death was not a simple ending. It was the collapse of a man, worn down by years of pressure, dependency and loneliness. The endless tours, the pills, the long nights that blurred into dawn. His body had carried more than it could bear. Even in his final days, he spoke of plans, of recording new music, of reaching for another chance. But time refused him. The funeral was a spectacle of love and loss. More than 80,000 fans lined the streets of Memphis. They came not just to mourn a singer, but to honor a man who had given them a soundtrack to their lives. From teenagers who once screamed at his hips in 1956, to mothers who cradled babies to the sound of "Love Me Tender," generations stood together, united by grief. Inside, Priscilla held their daughter close, shielding her from cameras. Friends, bandmates, and fellow musicians wept. And as the casket passed through the gates of Graceland, the crowd erupted, not in cheers, but in a collective sob that seemed to shake the very air. In death, Elvis became more than a man. He became legend, myth, immortal symbol. His voice still lived on vinyl, his image on screens, his spirit in the hearts of millions. But for those who truly knew him, the memory was softer. Elvis was the boy from Tupelo, shy and polite. Elvis was the father who adored his daughter. Elvis was the man who longed for peace, but rarely found it. The curtain had fallen, but the song remained. Legends never truly die. They echo on in the hearts that believed in them. In the years after 1977, Elvis Presley transformed from man into myth. His voice still poured from jukeboxes and radios, but now with a haunting weight. Every lyric felt like a farewell. Graceland, once his private sanctuary, became a shrine. By 1982, the Presley family opened its gates, and fans flooded in. Today, more than 650,000 visitors a year walk those halls, tracing the steps of a legend. The impersonators came first, men in rhinestone jumpsuits, slicked back hair, and curled lips. Some were jokes, others tributes, but all carried a truth. Elvis had become larger than life, impossible to contain. In Las Vegas, Elvis weddings surged. On small-town stages, tribute acts kept his songs alive. It was as if people refused to let him go, determined to keep the king breathing through imitation. But the ripples ran deeper. Musicians from Bruce Springsteen to Bono credited Elvis as the spark that ignited their dreams. Before Elvis, John Lennon famously said, "There was nothing." His influence stitched itself into rock, country, gospel, even hip-hop samples decades later. Every genre carried his fingerprints. Even the young mother in Albuquerque, who once received his quiet kindness in 1972, told her children that story for the rest of her life. "He didn't just sing," she said. "He saw people." That moment, small in scale, became her family's inherited truth, that compassion from greatness was possible. How many others carried similar stories, whispered at kitchen tables or passed down at reunions? There were physical testaments too. The bronze statue unveiled in Tupelo, fans leaving scarves and teddy bears at its feet. The Elvis Presley Foundation, funding scholarships for kids who reminded people of the boy he once was. Annual vigils, lit with candles outside Graceland, where silence fell on the stroke of midnight. You could almost hear his voice carried in the hush. And the myths, they never stopped. Elvis sighted at gas stations, supermarkets, airports. Tabloids ran wild with Elvis lives headlines. In a way, maybe he did, not in flesh, but in the refusal of people to accept his absence. What other star, decades gone, could still sell out arenas through holograms, or spark tears with the first chords of Can't Help Falling in Love? Elvis was not perfect. He battled demons, made mistakes, lost himself in excess. But legacy does not demand perfection. Legacy demands impact, and Elvis's impact was, and remains, immeasurable. In every candle lit at Graceland, in every young musician strumming his first guitar, in every crowd that still goes dead silent before a tribute performance, his presence endures. The ripples became the river, the man became the myth became the memory that refuses to fade. In the end, the story of Elvis Presley is not just about music, or fame, or even tragedy. It is about moments, the small human choices that echo louder than any concert. Think back to that night in Albuquerque. A young mother, her voice nearly drowned by the roar of thousands, begged softly for help. Elvis heard her, and instead of ignoring her, he reached out with quiet kindness. That single act was not splashed across headlines. It didn't make the evening news, but for her, and for the child at her side, it became unforgettable. A story told again and again, proof that the king of rock and roll was still just a man who saw people, not crowds. How many of us carry moments like that? Times when a stranger's compassion changed our lives. Elvis had the world in his hands, yet his legacy shines brightest, not only in sold-out arenas, but in these hidden gestures, because compassion, unlike fame, does not fade. It ripples outward. The young mother's children grew up knowing kindness was possible, even from the most unlikely places. That memory, planted in 1972, outlived the man himself. And isn't that what truly matters? Not the scandals, not the costumes, not the flashbulbs, but the humanity behind the legend. The boy from Tupelo, who never forgot the sting of poverty, who slipped dollars into strangers' hands, who stopped a show to give what he could. Elvis lived imperfectly, but he loved greatly. Today, when fans light candles outside Graceland, they aren't just mourning what was lost, they're honoring what remains. The music, yes, but also the spirit of generosity that defined him at his core. Even in death, Elvis teaches us that greatness is not measured by applause, but by the quiet kindnesses we leave behind. So the next time life puts you in a moment where someone is begging softly, maybe a friend, maybe a stranger, remember Elvis in Albuquerque. Remember that the choice to answer with compassion can echo across decades, carried in stories and memories.
in lives changed forever. Legends fade on the stage, but kindness lives on in the human heart. That is the kind of immortality Elvis Presley achieved. One small act at a time. Stories like this remind us that kindness outlives applause. If this moment moved you, share it with someone who needs the reminder. And if you want more untold chapters of legends like Elvis, stay with us, because the next story might change how you see greatness forever.